This is Rick Levine with the September astrology forecast. This is a pretty interesting month coming up, but then again, what would we expect this year in 2020, a year of one interesting month after another? Before we jump into the material, I'd like to share some very exciting news with you. I am teaching a course in the Foundations of Astrology, and this will be available through Astrology Hub. And the Astrology Hub link is down below here. The link will also be in my comment section here on YouTube. This will be a 5-week class beginning in October, and the 5 weeks will run through the basic fundamentals of astrology. The thing here is that whether you're an absolute beginner, an intermediate student, or even someone who's been kicking around astrology for quite a while, the perspective on putting all this together in a short course is something that can help push or move your astrology studies along. Check out the information and check out the link below, and I'll see you in October for this amazing course. I'm looking forward to teaching it, and I hope you join us. Now, back to September. So, this month is intriguing because we are now reaching a point in the year where a major phase that has been with us for months is beginning to come to an end. And I say beginning to come to an end because it's not quite done. And what I'm referring to is the retrograde season that really began back in March with Mercury retrograding in Pisces, and but then that stepping up a notch when we had the beginnings of the planets one at a time turning retrograde, where we had Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto each turning retrograde, and then of course Neptune also. But the point here, and then we had Venus turn retrograde. It's been quite a retrograde year. But in September, what we see is the outer planets begin to end their retrograde phase. What I mean by beginning to end their retrograde phase is that in September, both Jupiter and Saturn turn direct, ending their retrograde phase, but Pluto doesn't turn direct until next month, until October. So of these three heavyweights, which have been hanging out in Capricorn, what I've referred to as the Capricorn Council of Planets, the three heavyweights, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, having all been retrograde since April and May, now first Jupiter on September 12th, and then Saturn on September 28th turn direct. And this is a huge slow motion releasing of the energy that's been building and not going anywhere, and tying us to the past, forcing this reactive reconsideration, reviewing of history. And as these two planets begin to move forward, we will certainly see some movement moving forward. However, and this is a big however, and the however is that on September 9th, Mars begins its retrograde phase. And remember, Mars, which had moved into Aries back the end of June, Mars normally spends about 6 weeks, 7 weeks in a sign. And because of this retrograde phase, Mars, which moved into Aries back at the end of June, on June 27th, Mars is in Aries until January 6th. That's over 6 months. And so this retrograde Mars is of huge impact. If you check out my previous YouTube video, the mid-August, mid-month video, it really drills down very deeply into the Mars retrograde and the meaning of how it impacts us from not only September, not only August, September, but October, November, December, and even into January of next year. I'm not going to dig down as deeply on that material right now, but it's important to understand that as September opens, Mars is already crawling along. Mars is moving quite slowly, and it turns retrograde on the 9th. And so we are kind of, even though we're getting the Jupiter and Saturn getting ready to move forward or moving forward, Mars turning retrograde is like an, oh no, it's another push backwards, or at least it might feel that way. Now, it's important to understand that Mars, which is the planet of boundaries, Mars is the ego that says this is where my stuff ends and your stuff begins. Mars is the warrior planet. So Mars is where we have the skirmishes with other, whatever other might be, whether it might be another person, another idea, another religion, another perspective or point of view. Mars is basically where the conflict meets. It's where I rub up against you, or where one thing rubs up against another. Now, when a planet turns retrograde, and I know those of you who have listened to these over the years have heard me say this again and again and again, when a planet turns retrograde, that means it's closer to Earth than it is at other times during its normal cycle. What that means is that as the planet gets closer to Earth, it's like a radio station getting louder and louder and louder. And what this means is Mars, the planet of assertion, Mars, the planet of setting boundaries, Mars, the planet of aggression, even anger. As Mars, the angry red planet, gets closer and closer to Earth, the energy of Mars heats up. Now, this is technically a red alert. Why? Because it's the red planet. And so here we have something that we need to pay attention to, because this will be with us from September 9th all the way through November 13th. So we're looking at a little bit over 2 months where Mars is retrograde, which means that we're a little bit more inclined to impulsively respond from a gut level place of impulsive reaction, rather than from a logical place of let's get this right. And so, unfortunately, this often heats up the energy on the planet. Angry words tend to get angrier. And so we just need to pay attention as astrologers, as students of astrology, as people who are aware of astrology. We need to understand that this is the background of September, October, and into November. That this retrograde Mars is going to be heating this energy up, and so we need to pay attention to that, especially because Mars is in its home sign of Aries, where Mars is very comfortable doing battle, doing war, or setting boundaries. Now, there is a very healthy way for Mars to establish boundaries, and this is really what we need to strive for. And this is something that I'll talk about as we unfold the month. So before I brought up charts, I wanted to start off with this retrograde talk, because this really sets the background for the month. In some ways, it's Saturn and it's Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn that are the key players this month. Not that other planets don't have impact, but those are the planets that we'll be paying attention to. So with no further ado, let me bring up the chart for September 1st, and we will play this through. Okay, so we are now looking at a chart for September 1st, and we can see that we start the month off with, of course, the sun in Virgo, because this is Virgo time of year. One of the important dates in the month of September is the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere, the vernal equinox if you live down under the equator. But the sun actually moves from Virgo into Libra on September 22nd. That's the equinox. And so we begin the month with both the sun and Mercury in the sign of Virgo, Virgo being the earth-based sign that has to do with analysis. Virgo is the thinking process. Virgo is the attention to details. But as we begin the month, the sun is moving into a trine with Uranus, and Uranus in earth sign Taurus. This is a wild card. And although it's a trine, that means the energy expresses easily. That exact trine between the sun and Uranus is on September 2nd, but we're talking about it on September 1st because we are coming into a full moon, which is late on the evening of September 1st on the west coast of the United States, and very early in the morning on the morning of September 2nd on the East Coast. And we'll look at that chart for just a moment, but we want to start off looking at the fact that the Virgo sun trining Uranus is about the expression of that normally focused energy in a way that can break through. We're looking at sudden breakthroughs here. We're looking at awakening of awareness. We're looking at an opening, and that will be associated with the full moon as we get to that chart in just a moment. The other thing that we're looking at is that Mercury in Virgo has already made its trine with Jupiter at 17 Capricorn, and just yesterday with Pluto. Actually, it's early on the morning of September 1st, not yesterday, it's early this morning, where Mercury makes the trine with Pluto, and then Mercury makes the trine with Saturn on September 3rd. So what we're seeing here, because Mercury is the planet that's related to Virgo, the sun is in Virgo trining Uranus, which is mentally explosive. It's that I got the idea. It's like an aha. It's like the light bulb going off over our head. And with Mercury also at home in Virgo, making these harmonious trines to the planets in Capricorn, the ideas that we have are not necessarily as crazy, that would be Uranus, as they might seem because the sun is making that trine to Uranus. In fact, Mercury making the trine to Pluto this morning on the 1st of September, and then on the 3rd making that trine to Saturn, it really grounds and stabilizes that energy, and that is so important for what's going on right now. The other thing is that we are coming into also exact on September 2nd, but these are all playing as part of the full moon that will be on the evening or the night of September 1st into the morning of September 2nd. And that is that the fact that Venus at 25 degrees of Cancer, which has also already made its opposition to Jupiter and to Pluto, Venus is coming into an opposition with Saturn that is exact early in the morning on September 2nd, which means this is very close during the full moon chart. You'll also notice in this chart that Mars, which has already made its squares to Jupiter and to Pluto and to Saturn, Mars is actually going to turn retrograde, and by the end of the month, Mars will be backing up and making that square again to Saturn, and then in October to Pluto and Jupiter. But we also have cooking here in this chart that's part of this chart, and that is the fact that Venus is squaring Mars. So we can see here, Venus is opposing Saturn, which is squaring Mars. And this energy is very much a restraint on our sense of aesthetics. That would be Venus opposite Saturn, our wanting to do what the right thing is, to be responsible. But Mars squaring it is kind of a little bit, especially in Aries and especially moving toward a station, that Mars is heated up and we might get overexcited and do something that is stupid unless we actually think it through. So let's actually move this chart ahead, or actually let's put up the chart for the full moon. We are now looking at a chart for 10:21 p.m., and that would be Pacific time. Remember, that's 1:21 a.m. on September 2nd if you're on the East Coast. But we are looking at a chart now where the moon in Pisces, the full moon in Pisces, is opposite the Virgo sun. And we can see now that the sun has moved much closer toward that trine with Uranus. So we can see that little triangle between the sun and the moon in opposition to one another. And Uranus is making or the sun and the moon are making trines and sextiles respectively to Uranus. And what this means is that the tension of this full moon, and let's speak about the tension of this full moon for at first, because the tension of any full moon is the tension between the awareness of what's on the outside and what's on the inside. It's the objective, the sun, versus the subjective, the moon. Now, in this particular case, the moon being in Pisces is really about the part of us that is open to experiencing things that are not ours. In other words, Pisces is receptive. Pisces is water. Water is emotional. The moon in Pisces is receptive to other people's emotions. It is open. It is spiritual. It is compassionate. But of course, when I am open and spiritual and compassionate, and I don't mean me personally, Rick, I mean when one of us is open, and if we're wide open, it's very easy to get confused as to what my feelings are versus what the feelings are that I'm feeling that might be coming from you or from the outside. And so that moon in Pisces is a bit of boundlessness. We were talking earlier about how Mars actually fights for maintaining boundaries, and that Mars in this chart certainly is still doing that. But that moon in Pisces doesn't have boundaries. It is open, it is receptive, it is psychic, it is intuitive, it is basically ready to receive like a sponge anything that comes toward it. Now, it is diametrically opposite or opposed the sun in Virgo, and as wide open and receptive as the moon is in Pisces, the sun in Virgo is like a narrowing beam. I always think of Virgo like a laser beam. If a laser beam is on you, you know it. In fact, a laser beam can be searing. It can burn something up if it's the right kind of laser beam. The amount of energy compacted into a very narrow frequency can basically can create a combustible situation. It's focused. It's highly critical. Now, the thing is about Virgo is that if the sun radiates energy, and yet in Virgo that energy is narrowing, if that energy is right on you, it can be searing. But if it's just a touch off, and if it's not exactly on you, you might not even notice it at all. And this is why people who have Virgo ascendants or suns or moons or emphasis in their charts, why people can think they're a little cool or a little aloof. They may be as hot as someone can be, and yet if their attention isn't directly on you, then you might never, ever, ever know it. You even think of this time of year. We've had we're at the end of summer, and the sun in Cancer was as close to the earth. It was as direct in the northern hemisphere as could be. And the energy was very nurturing, very growing. And then we go to Leo, and the result of that nurturing sun is now we have the flowers in full bloom, and the Leo is everything is out in the open. The sun is very direct. And as the sun moves into Virgo, it's not going away yet. It's not moving into a less direct position as it will in the northern hemisphere once the sun moves into Libra, but it's slowing down, and it's becoming, the rays of the sun become more critical. And if you think about it, that's when we harvest things, because we harvest things at the point of the criticalness of as much energy as possible being compacted into a small space. What do I mean by that? Well, wheat is harvested when the energy of the entire plant is compacted into a tiny seed, and we harvest that, and then the Virgo separates, because Virgo wants to find the detail of what's good and what's not good, what's useful and what's not useful. And when the sun's in Virgo, we separate the wheat, the seeds, the pulse of life from the chaff, from the stalks that we don't use, that we recycle. And so again, this time of year, as the harvest time of year, is about the energy being focused and compacted into seeds, and that's when we harvest it. So this full moon, in a way, is the dichotomy between the the most diffuse and open energy, Pisces, and let's also keep in mind that that moon in Pisces is moving toward a conjunction with Neptune, which if Pisces is the most diffusive sign, well, Neptune is the most diffusive planet. And so that moon in Pisces is kind of opening up boundaries and causing hard edges to soften and maybe blur, and maybe that can be quite confusing. On the other hand, the sun is picking out where it's going to shine its rays exactly, supported by the fact that Mercury also is in Virgo. And so we get this tug of war between the opening up and wanting to include everything to the point of being confused because we're including fact and fiction all as one. That would be the Pisces moon side. And the other side, that Virgo sun, is the part that wants to get exactly what's right. Now, the thing is that both the sun and Mercury in Virgo are both making harmonious aspects to other earth-bound planets. When I say earth-bound, I mean planets in earth signs. Uranus in determined Taurus, and that would be the sun's trine to Uranus, and Mercury's trine to the Capricorn Council, but in particular coming into the trine to Saturn, where the energy is even stabilized more. So we're getting a huge wave of positive energy if we can remember not to just float off into an undiscriminating open state of mind that does not differentiate fact from fiction. It's easy to get caught up in images, illusions. It's easy to get caught up in other people's beliefs and other people's perceptions. This is all the moon in Pisces. This is that energy coming to a culmination. And yet it's the sun in Virgo and the Mercury in Virgo that's really that's doing the hard lifting here in an easy way, hard lifting because it's releasing the tension, but in an easy way because they're both trines, Mercury coming into trining Saturn and the sun trining Uranus. Now, the other thing that's going on here, though, even though it's not an aspect of the sun or the moon, is that Venus is coming into an opposition with Saturn. Now, Venus is the planet of love. It's the planet of sweetness. It's the planet of beauty. Venus in the sign of Cancer, it can be tender. It's soft because it's introspective. It's receptive. Venus in Cancer isn't necessarily very loud, but it can be very loving because Cancer is the nurturing sign. And in fact, the moon is at home in Cancer. So during a full moon, any planet in the moon's home sign, in this case Venus, is going to be loud. So that Venus in Cancer really wants to take care of those that are loved. And yet she's having a hard time doing it because she's running into the wall of authority, and that would be her opposition to Saturn. I mentioned earlier that Mars had already made its square with Saturn just a few days ago, and that by the end of the month, when Mars turns direct, Mars will in fact make that second square with Saturn, and I have that here somewhere. Here it is. Mars makes the second square to Saturn on September 29th. So it made the first square to Saturn when it was direct on August 24th. And it really doesn't get very far away from that square position to Saturn. So in a way, all of September's background note is as Mars is slowing down to go retrograde on September 9th and then turns retrograde, Mars actually is never more than 2 degrees away from its square to Saturn. Mars in Aries, hot, brash, impulsive, spontaneous, expressive, angry, defensive, offensive, and Saturn going, whoa, slow down. Mars is saying, do it, go for it. And Saturn saying, if you go for it, there's a price to pay. And here is the dilemma that I think builds up the frustration of this retrograde Mars, because as that Mars is forced by Saturn to be restrained, that Mars gets hotter and hotter and angrier and angrier. So something's got to give. And I just hope and pray that we all have enough sense to work with that Mars energy, because it will go direct. And it will make that third and final square to Saturn next January. And that date is January 13th, when Mars makes the third and final square to Saturn. But it's not lost on me that in the United States here, this is all tied up with presidential politics. And we will see what that third and final square of Mars to Saturn actually frees us from. That until then, we might feel like that Mars is still having to answer to Saturn. So all in all, this is an incredibly powerful full moon. I mean, all moons in their own right are powerful because they're fruition, their culmination. But this particular one, in some ways, is a culmination of the dream that, in this case, may have gone a little bit wrong. And it can rectify or fix the situation, because this moon is sextile to Uranus. And the moon, the full moon, meaning the moon opposite the sun is trine Uranus. And that Uranus, therefore, exists at a point called the point of Thales. Thales was a Greek mathematician, and the point of Thales is whenever you have an opposition, there can be a point that is sextile one side of the opposition and trine the other. And in this case, that is Uranus, that's sextile the full moon, allowing that moon to express in a stable, because Uranus is in Taurus, a stable and practical manner. And that and the sun trining Uranus is also allowing a breakthrough the structures that were holding the energy back. Incidentally, the Venus trine Saturn, which we talked about just a few minutes ago, also during this full moon, also has a planet at the point of Thales. And that planet at the point of Thales in that opposition is Mercury, which is forming a sextile to the Venus and Cancer side of the equation, and a trine to the Saturn and Capricorn side of the equation. So again and again and again, the energy comes back to Mercury, the communicator, to Virgo, the planet, to Virgo, the sign that is the home sign for Mercury, the communicator, for that laser-like focus, discriminating logic and reason that is going to allow us to work our way out of the situation that we may find the tension has led us to. So that was a whole lot for just an opening, but that full moon is very much a statement of the opening of the month. So now we're going to come back to the chart for the opening of September 1st. That's at 12 noon. We're now at midnight of the next day of September 2nd. And we can see how we have that the Venus very closely opposing Saturn. As I move that ahead to the 3rd, that brings the Mercury by the 3rd. That brings the Mercury into trine with Saturn. Interestingly enough, on the 3rd, we have not only the Mercury trining Saturn, but we also have the moon in later degrees of Pisces now forming an opposition to Mercury and a sextile to Saturn, and even a trine to Venus. So I think that there's a strong amount of flowing energy that's moving off an incredibly heightened tension. And as we move on to the 4th, we get to the Venus square Mars. And this is an interesting aspect because Venus and Mars have been kind of moving together at around the same speed. And the square between Venus and Mars is a square that can go either way. It can be annoying, it can be hostile, it can be angry, it can be a bit of conflict fighting, but it also can be playful sparring. Remember, Venus and Mars are the lovers. Venus and Mars, when they're working together, can be incredibly creative. And even though there's conflict between them, and in fact, Saturn is still in the picture here, the fact is that we can do some really powerful and profound creative work during this period of time, from the full moon on through Venus's square to Mars on the 4th. We also have on the 4th Mercury making a sextile to Venus, and that even adds a little bit more to that. You see, Mercury is forming an uneasy quincunx to Mars, and that might mean that our communication, our words, our written words, our spoken words might actually misrepresent really what we're trying to do. That would be the Mars, the intention, the assertion. And yet Venus, which is kind of at odds with Mars, is actually working really well with Mercury. And this would be a good astrological metaphor for using language to work out our differences rather than physically doing that. I said earlier when talking about the full moon how important Mercury was, and Mercury and Virgo are both about communication and about useful communication. So here again at the Mercury sextile Venus, we once again have another corroboration how important communication is at settling differences of opinion. On the 5th, we have Mercury changing signs. Mercury moves out of Virgo, actually late on the 5th, so it'll show here on the 6th, but it's late on the 5th. Mercury moves into Libra, and now Mercury is ahead of the sun. Mercury is kind of like the early warning for the sun. And although the sun is still in Virgo, it won't be in Libra for another 2 weeks. The fact is that once Mercury moves into Libra, our mind, our thinking, our intelligence, we, rather than having this laser-like focus, we want to find balance. We want to create harmony. There's a part of us that begins to realize that when Mercury moves into Libra, we begin to realize that being right isn't necessarily going to get us to where we need to be, that we need to be in harmony and in balance. And this may take a bit of diplomatic energy. It may take a bit of negotiation. It may take a bit of not only diplomacy, but a sense of open-mindedness, fair-mindedness, I think is the better term, because Mercury is the intellect, it's communication. And when it goes into Libra, it's like the scales. We seek fair-minded. We seek something that puts things into harmony. This is an important transition. And it is followed by Venus's change of signs from Cancer into Leo. And we can see here we have Mercury having moved into Libra and Venus having moved from Cancer, where she'd been rather quiet and receptive and maybe even demure. And Venus moves into Leo, and all of a sudden she says what she wants. Venus is in Leo is more expressive. It's more outgoing. It's more demonstrative. I think that's a key word. The integrity of expressing what one's needs, desires, and wants are, I think, occurs as that Venus moves into Leo on the 6th. So the 5th and the 6th are a changing period of time because we're getting two inner planets, Mercury, intellect, Venus, desires, getting that shift from Venus in quiet, indrawn, receptive, nurturing Cancer into a much more expressive, outgoing Leo, and Mercury, the communication aspect, from a very exacting, specific, even timid, do the right thing, into a more expressive and open and diplomatic Libra. Both of these moves, both Venus and Mercury, moving from softer, or let me just say more receptive, more passive signs into more directive and more yang, yin into yang signs, I think is an important piece also of what's going on. And what that's leading to is by the 9th, we have the sun moving into the first of its trines to the planets in Capricorn. The sun makes a trine to Jupiter that is exact on September 9th. The sun, incidentally, will make a trine to Pluto on the 14th. and then the sun will make a trine to Saturn on the 17th. And again, in some ways, this relieves some of the pressure that had been building through the last month as Mars made squares to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. Now, although Mars isn't quite out of range of being done with that, it's almost like as we hit this September 9th period of time, and the sun moves into that trine with Jupiter, again, there's hope, there's optimism, there's something that we can see that's ahead that might give us the ability to have a better attitude, maybe even be more confident. This is a very important piece, but at the same time, Mars, which had been heading for Taurus, Mars at the very end of Aries, now slows down, and it on the actually on the 9th, on the 10th, late on the 9th, on the afternoon of the 9th, Mars turns retrograde, but it's not moving very fast now. Again, from the very beginning of the month, when Mars was at 27 degrees of Aries, to now, Mars has only moved a degree in the past week and a half. And so Mars, as it's turning from direct to retrograde, is really holding still in the sky. And one of the things that I've said again and again and again is that the slower moving a planet is, the more powerful, the more the more chronic, the heavier the weight of that planet, which is why when Mercury turns retrograde or direct, it slows down, it gains power. The same with Venus, and maybe even more so with Mars, because Mars is that planet of assertion. And as it slows down, we all want to hold our position. And again, this is on September 9th. On the 10th and 11th, we have a couple of oppositions that come into play. We have Mercury forming an opposition to Chiron, and the sun moving into opposition with Neptune. Now, these are two different flavors, but they work together because Mercury opposing Chiron is about the need to communicate in a way that doesn't perpetuate our old wounds and hurts. In fact, Mercury opposing Chiron gives us an opportunity to forgive and to move on. And yet the tendency is to, instead of wanting to forgive, is wanting to hold on to that and to blame. And that's partly because in an opposition, there's a tension between that fair-minded Mercury and the Chiron, the wounded healer who has a lesson to teach us. Now, at the same time, the sun coming into an opposition to Neptune is going to introduce our old friend of confusion. Neptune opposed, or the sun opposed Neptune certainly can be spiritual and high-minded, but it's likely that we get confused as to what's real. In fact, we might hold on to our beliefs in such a high-minded manner that we end up being guilty of spiritual bypassing or not necessarily dealing with what is. In a way, this is setting that Mercury opposition to Chiron up to almost forgiving without really feeling. And that has its own level of danger. In other words, the sun's opposition to Neptune can be a lack of clarity between the exact Virgo reality and the Neptune, the dream imagination. Now, this can be incredibly useful because it's incredibly creative. It's imagination, it's dreams, which of course is spiritual. But again, if we keep this in balance, that's how it's going to work the best. And remember, we're just coming off that sun trining Jupiter, which in itself was expansive. But the next thing that'll happen is that sun will move toward a trine with Pluto, which really grounds that energy down a bit and brings it into a place where we can really do the work of transmuting, of the metamorphosis of the dark, of the underworld, of the plutonic into the expansive, into the good, into the light, into the hopeful of what's ahead. That brings us up to the 12th. And remember, during this period of time, I mentioned this earlier, that Jupiter actually turns direct on the 12th. So as the sun is making its trine to Jupiter, that was back on September 9th, the sun is also kind of catching Jupiter at a moment where Jupiter is slowed down and it's ready to push forward. And so I think this is really a good news transit, as long as we don't create these illusory, that would be Neptune, pie in the sky dreams that aren't based upon reality, that we just become overconfident in. Now, this can be a very grounded solution that is taking hold. It can also be an absolute made up sequence of events that are not grounded in reality, that we turn into real because we are so confident that it's real. And of course, that's where the Neptunian danger of confusion or mixing up fantasy with reality can sneak in. Into this, we also have Venus coming into a trine with Chiron. Again, the healing power here is expanded. This is about love. This is even about finding the wounds, whether they're in ourselves or in others, whether they're in others we love or others we disagree with. This is about finding a way to accept and to love that energy in them. And this is very important because that Venus trine Chiron is in some ways setting up the sun now coming into the trine with Pluto, which is exact on the 14th. But we talked about that a little bit. Remember, Pluto is the deepening of the energy. Pluto is the unconscious, that sun in practical, logical, useful, effective Virgo, making a trine to Pluto, is wanting to take that stuff that's coming out, that was hidden, that's coming out into the open, and it wants to do something with it that is real and important. Now, we do run into a couple of speed bumps as we approach the new moon on the 17th, and the speed bumps are Venus square Uranus and Mercury square Jupiter. Venus squares Uranus on the 15th, and Venus square Uranus is not necessarily negative, but it can have difficult impact or influence because, again, Venus in Leo is demonstrative, and Uranus in Taurus is maybe eccentric, but it also wants to hold on to what it believes and what it knows or what it thinks it knows. It can be very stubborn. Venus squaring that Uranus can release energy because we want something that's different. All of a sudden, this is building, but by the 15th, when Venus squares Uranus, we're no longer interested in maintaining the status quo. We want something that's outside of the box. We want something different. We want to see something that makes things happen, that can break us free from the old restraints. And although this can be exciting and can be fun, it can also be upsetting. And especially as Mercury is moving toward its first square to the Capricorn Council of Planets, and Mercury actually reaches the square to Jupiter on the 17th. And that square to Jupiter is basically about turning a molehill into a mountain. Why? Because Mercury is thinking, it's logical. Remember, in Libra, it wants to be fair-minded. It wants to be the go-between. It wants to connect this with that and do it in a way that allows for both sides of the equation to have some balance. Equanimity, I think, is a good word. But as that Jupiter squares Pluto, we can overdo it. We can turn our solution into the most grandiose concept or idea where it actually loses usefulness. And remember that Mercury squaring Jupiter, just like the sun's trine to Jupiter on the 9th was the beginning, where the sun trined Jupiter on the 9th, then the sun trined Pluto on the 14th, the sun trines Saturn on the 17th, which would be the same day that the Mercury squares Jupiter. And so we're seeing both the sun and Mercury aspect these Capricorn planets but Mercury is doing it by square. Incidentally, Mercury will finish this by squaring Pluto on the 20th and then squaring Saturn on the 23rd. So Mercury is creating some angst, some conflict between how we want to be fair-minded, and yet the reality police, the structure, the authority is basically dictating what happens. Meanwhile, as the sun moves through these same points, first it's trine to Jupiter back on the 9th, and then it's trine to Pluto on the 14th, and finally it's trine to Saturn on the 17th. This is all about giving stability to these very critically thought out ideas and concepts. And of course, here we're also coming into the new moon in Virgo. Here we have the new moon in Virgo chart. This is for 4 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. That would be 7 a.m. New York time. And this is on September 17th, on the morning of September 17th. And this new moon in Virgo is incredibly powerful because it is partile trine Saturn. Partile is the astrology's word, astrologer's word, but it's the language of astrologies. It's the astrologer's word for the same degree. In other words, the sun and the moon are conjunct. That's the new moon, which is the seed of their cycle, at 25 degrees Virgo and 1 minute, 25 degrees, 1 minute of Virgo. They are trine to Saturn at 25 degrees Capricorn and 27 minutes. But the fact that they're both 25 degrees, they are in the same degree, intensifies the energy. And so a partile trine means that the energy is absolutely flowing back and forth. What is the energy? The energy is the seed that we're planting at this critical moment where we're planting maybe the tiniest of seeds. The smallest seed can have such stability and such framework that makes it grounded. It's the acorn that grows into a mighty oak tree. And this is the magic of this new moon in Virgo, is that if we can maintain an element of truly critical thinking. And when I say critical thinking, I don't mean just saying what's wrong with everything, not criticizing. I mean critical in the idea of a laser is a critical energy. It's the critical mass. It's that which is exacting so that it is like right exactly on. And so if we can maintain critical thinking, thinking that really does discriminate the fact from the fiction, the imagined from the reality, the useful from the not useful, the kind from the unkind, the love from the hate. If we can use that Virgo new moon in that exacting manner, its trine to Saturn almost guarantees, let's say it ensures the fact that what we plant with our intentions, not just verbal intentions, but actions, because at new moons, the ritualizing of the energy of a new moon is not just making a list of wishes or intentions. It's not even just saying them out loud, although that certainly is useful, because when we say things out loud, we give it voice, we give it reality, we create vibration that makes things manifest. This is a very important part of a ritual. But the other part of a ritual is priming the pump. You know, you can hit that pump up and down if it's a dry pump all you want, but it just takes a little bit of water in the pump that primes it, and then all of a sudden you're pumping water, not just dry air, dry air. And so the way we prime the pump of a ritual is actually doing it, is doing some sort of physical manifestation that gives the cosmos the hook to say, ah, here's the action that's occurring. I can slide in here and actually get that water flowing. It's more than just saying something out loud. It's more than just writing it down. So in fact, this new moon's trine to Saturn is a very profound and powerful manifester. It's a stabilizer to what we have going. However, and there is an important however, and we already talked about it, and that is that Mercury is forming a square with Jupiter at the same time during this new moon, and that means that we can have some sort of inflated ideas that we want to plant that we think are exact and we think they're really good, but they're so out of reach that doesn't matter how much energy we put into it, it ain't going to happen. And so that Mercury square Jupiter is a reminder, a warning, and an invitation. It's a reminder that we can't just think our way out of the box, that we have to go to the earthy practicality of that new moon in Virgo. It's a reminder that we can't think our way out of the box. It's also a reflection of the potential of overexpanding, of taking an idea that's really good and making it so big that it loses its narrow impact. Remember, the Virgo new moon is small is beautiful. It's the impact of the very focused outweighs the impact of the big idea. And then the other thing is that the Mercury square Jupiter is also saying, if I can hit it on the head, if I can hit that nail on the head, this then can give power. This can energize my ideas, my creations. But the warning is not to just inflate my thinking without keeping that energy grounded. Remember, the focus here on the new moon in Virgo is the new moon in Virgo, and that the Mercury square Jupiter is a bit of a distraction, and it can be a helper, but if we let it be a distraction and take our mind off of the need to keep things simple, small, and focused, then we will lose the power that we would have otherwise had to manifest during this very powerful new moon. Following the new moon on the 18th and 19th, we run into a couple of annoying quincunxes. We run into a quincunx from Mercury to Neptune, which is just another readjustment of not having gotten it quite right. We may have overinflated, and now we're kind of having to refocus. This is a bit of illogical thinking. This is it's another warning. It's held up. It's contained within that new moon in Virgo, but it takes a little bit to manifest. And by the 18th, we may be dealing with the results of the faulty thinking or logic that we had just the day prior. And then by the 19th, we have the sun making a quincunx with Mars. And again, here, the energy is a bit destable. Mars is moving retrograde now, not very fast, because remember, Mars was at 27 degrees. Mars was at 27 degrees of Aries at the beginning of the month, and it turned retrograde, and now it's toward the middle end of the month, and Mars is still at 27 degrees. So that Mars is very powerful there, and as the sun, the faster moving of the two planets there, as the sun comes through that quincunx, we run into the irritation of not having the amount of aggression or assertion, that's Mars, right. Again, we can become too focused and too narrow-minded. We can become so focused that we don't take action, or we can be dealing with the having done too much just a day or two ago. In either rate, the 18th, in either case, the 18th and 19th are both about realignment, readjustment, and that leads us also, by the way, on the 21st, and we'll get there in a moment, Venus is moving through its quincunxes to Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. So we can see how all month these Capricorn planets are really still running the show, but they're running it by being reflected and being amplified and being annoyed by and being encouraged by planets making aspects to those points. And we'll get to that Venus quincunx Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn in just a moment. But you can see that very much the 18th, 19th, 20th, the 21st, 22nd, actually all the way through the 28th, we really have these quincunxes that are kind of, the word I use is quinksy. It's a made up word, but we feel like we can't get it exactly right. It's not quite frustration, although it's frustration. It's annoyance, and an annoyance can be even worse than an outright frustration because we can't resolve it. And remember, Mars retrograding is heading back towards squares to Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, and it'll make that square to Saturn on the 29th of the month. So we're already on the way, and this quincunx here of the Sun quincunx on the 19th, I think, is a very important piece also. On the 20th, we have Mercury now making its square to Pluto. Remember, Mercury made its square to Jupiter on the 17th, and it will make its square to Saturn on the 23rd. So this is a whole sweep of Mercury simply not getting on with reality. We want to be fair-minded. We want to do what's right. We want to put things in balance. We want to get some, as I said, equanimity. We want to get some fairness. And yet that Mercury keeps running up against, first, its overinflation with its square to Jupiter, and now by the 20th, late on the 20th, that Mercury makes its square to Pluto, and this is basically having to deal with more than we thought we'd have to deal with. Mercury says, I can say what's true. I can act as the harmonizer, the counselor, the therapist, the psychologist, the minister. I can act as the go-between, and yet I'm trying to go between energy where one of the parties simply just doesn't want to play. Pluto has its own agenda. Pluto is keeping stuff that's very powerful. It's under the surface. It's hard to negotiate with someone who doesn't put all the cards on the table. And so in a way where we may feel like we're negotiating in the dark here. And then on the 21st, that Venus reaches the quincunx to Saturn. And we talked about that already as part of Venus's quincunx to first Jupiter, then Pluto, then Saturn. And now we reach the point where the sun is at the last degrees of Virgo, and that sun is ready to move into Libra. But this is not just a change of signs. It's a change from a mutable or changeable sign. Remember, the mutable or changeable signs are the signs that precede the change of seasons, and the cardinal signs, or the first signs of the each season, basically initiate the season. So we have the cardinal sign of Aries in the northern hemisphere initiating spring, Cancer initiating summer, Libra. The sun's movement into Libra is the autumnal equinox in the northern hemisphere, and so it initiates the autumn in the north, and of course the spring in the south. And when the sun moves into Capricorn at the winter solstice, that then initiates the season of winter. So when we move into a new season, the energy here is a bit different, where we've moved out of that, let's be practical, let's be grounded, let's work with what we have. Let's look for the stable solution here. And instead, now as the sun moves into Libra, we now kind of go into this place of I don't care whether it's useful. I don't care whether it's going to work. What theoretically is the way in which we can resolve this energy. And so we look for solutions that may not be as reality based, but at the same time we have Mercury moving into its square. That's the third square, first with Jupiter we talked about, then with Pluto, and then we have Mercury moving into its square with Saturn. And as it does that, there's another bit of a reality factor. We run into, actually, Mercury is coming into an opposition with retrograde Mars. That's exact the following day on the 24th. But these are a rough couple of days because on one hand, we see that we see that we want to find a way of balancing the extreme energies. And at the same time, the more we try, the less it works. We run into obstacles and we maybe even run into a reaction of assertion or aggression from that opposition to Mars. On the 23rd, we have Venus making its quincunx to Neptune. This is uncertainty about what we really want. And then we have Venus making its quincunx to Pluto, and that's on the 26th. And so we're seeing here the annoyances kind of picking up a pace. We also see retrograde Mars now coming closer and closer, backing into its square to Saturn. In the midst of all of this, on the 27th, Mercury, which is moving quite quickly. Remember, Mercury moved into Libra on September 5th. Now it's the 27th, and Mercury moves out of Libra into Scorpio. And now we're getting a flavor of election season here in the United States, because election day is in November. That is a Scorpio energy, and there's finality with Scorpio. There's a sense of kind of cutting off, eliminating. When Mercury moves into Scorpio on the 27th, we get a kind of an advanced notification of that energy, and our thinking may become a lot more pointed. Maybe we've been riding the fence. We've been looking for that harmony point, even though the sun is still in Libra, and we still ultimately are trying to do that. In our mind, in our brains, in our thought patterns, we've already made the cut. We've made decisions that I think by the end of September are quite significant. Venus then, by the 28th, makes its last aspect to the Capricorn planets. It makes its quincunx to Saturn. Once again, we have this annoying irritation of something that isn't working. Our values are not matching up with the authorities. And then on the same day, we also have Venus making a harmonious trine with Mars, while Mars is moving into square with Saturn. This is an incredibly potent end of the month. We have this aspect here that I've talked about in the past, that are two planets that are quincunx, and one planet that's square one side of the quincunx and trine the other. This is called a learning triangle. It's like it doesn't work and it does work, and we have to figure out what works and make that the focus point, and we have to resolve what doesn't work. What do I mean by that? Well, the Venus trine Mars works. Remember, Venus was square Mars at the beginning of the month, and that was creating conflict. Now Venus is trine Mars, and that's creating a smooth, easy flow of energy between the yin and the yang, between the masculine and feminine energies, between the what I want, what I desire, and the how am I going to get it. So there's some flow here, and yet at the same time, now retrograde Mars has come back into a square that's actually exact on the 29th. But I mean, all through these days, Mars is not moving. This is heightened frustration again. This is bumping into that wall of authority. This is actually learning how to go to that Venus to cool our jets, to be a little bit more kind, a little bit more. I'm not talking about denying our needs. I'm not talking about burying our need to be assertive or to manage boundaries, but I'm talking about doing it in a way that perhaps is a little bit more ameliorative, not long-term, but short-term, because we have something that we want, something that Venus has in her mind, in its mind, that we're going for, and Mars can mess it up if Mars starts the wrong impulsive. Mars in Aries, if it starts the wrong battle, Mars can actually lead us in the wrong direction. So we need to really be paying attention to that Mars and figure out how to move the energy, but to do it in a way that is not ultimately destructive. This is so powerful because at the same time, on the same day, on the 28th actually, Saturn turns from retrograde to direct. And now Jupiter's already moving direct. Pluto won't turn direct until next month, but Saturn now is moving direct. It's backed up into Capricorn as far as it's going to get. It's in quincunx. It's not getting along with Venus. It's certainly not getting along with Mars, but it now is moving toward Capricorn, or moving out of Capricorn toward Aquarius. And so this Mars trining Venus and Mars squaring Saturn is heightened because of Saturn's station here. And we'll have to see how this plays out, but I don't like the feeling of Saturn being so strong, so stabilized. The authority here is going to rule, and that hot Mars can make itself crazy by trying to take on the stabilizing force of Saturn. And so we have to remember that we're not in a battle, we're in a war. And it's easy to get so caught up in whatever the local skirmish is, whether it's an argument with a friend, a lover, a spouse, a parent, a child, whether it's governmental, whether it's international politics. It's important to remember that there's a long-term game we're playing, not a short-term gratification. Mars in Aries loves that immediate gratification, and that's not going to be helpful now. So this takes us right up to the end of the month, because we go out with this Mars squaring Saturn, Saturn turning direct, Mars now retrograding back into that square with Venus in the picture, and it not feeling good. I can't imagine the last few days of this month being excitingly fun. And yet, oddly enough, even in all that, I don't think that they're as bad or dangerous as some of the things that we've gone through. I'm not sure how this will play out. Oh, I did fail to mention that also we have the Sun opposing Chiron. That is also exact on the 29th. That Sun forms that exact opposition to Chiron. And again, we have to be careful here about projecting our fears, our wounds onto others. We have to be careful about trying to fix something out there when it's really incumbent upon us to fix our stuff in here. Oppositions can be tricky because they create tension in the relationship dance. And I don't just mean a romantic or friendly relationship. This can be just simply the relationship between self and others, me and the world. It can be relationships between powers that be out there. And so the end of the month is certainly tricky, to say the least. All right, so where that brings us to is that brings us to the point where we actually need to take a perspective on the whole month. And actually, I would say that September is a month of change. It's a month of annoyance. It's a month where we have to be careful about anger management. I think that stands out as the most important thing throughout the month. I think we have important seeds during this month. The new moon on September 17th is incredibly powerful if we plant the right seed in the right direction, and in other words, the right intention in the right direction. And yet we need to make sure that we don't get so caught up in whatever the fear of the moment is, the anger of the moment, the wanting to make things even, the wanting to set things right. That will be the thing that will create more trouble than we need. And instead, we need to keep our eyes focused on the distance, because that's the game we're in right now. We've had two of the outer planets move direct in September. Pluto will follow. And although it won't be until November, that Mars will follow also, and things will begin to make sense pretty quickly after that, especially leading to Mars's third and final run through the squares to the Capricorn planets, and that won't occur until late December and on into January. Again, if you haven't watched the mid-August update that really details Mars's importance in this whole scenario, I suggest you watch that. That's here available on YouTube. I'll put the link to that also in the comments. And thank you all for participating in this. Keep breathing, that energy, moving it through. Don't bottle up your anger. Find ways to move your annoyance, your irritation, and your anger without taking it out on a wrong target, or without trying to take it out on a target that's going to be insurmountable. We need our energy for the long run here, because by the time we get to be in January, February of next year, we will be on a different playing field. Thank you all. As always, think cosmically, but act locally. I'm Rick Levine.